Hi, welcome to Changing Minds. I'm your host, Joe Devlin. It's been a week of grim stories for the theater industry. Both the National Theater and Shakespeare's Globe face permanent closure because of social distancing means financial ruin, not just for them, but for most theaters. Industry insiders suggest that West End and Broadway theaters are unlikely to be able to stage productions again until early next year. And yesterday, even Prince Charles got involved, raising concerns about how theaters and orchestras are going to survive. The situation's only slightly better for cinemas, who will struggle to make social distancing financially sustainable as well. The government suggested that cinemas may begin to cautiously reopen on the 4th of July, but who knows whether the audiences will be there. In some ways, professional sports is best off because games are being played, even though the fans aren't there. The National Football League in America estimates it'll lose $3.2 billion if it plays to empty stadiums this year. What theaters, orchestras, cinema, and sports all have in common is that they provide entertainment for live audiences. And the question they now all face is, will the audiences return when the doors reopen? With me to discuss this is Daniel Richardson, professor of experimental psychology and author of Man vs. Mind, Everyday Psychology Explained. Welcome to Changing Minds, Daniel.
Hi, Joe. Thanks for having me. It's nice to have an excuse to wear a proper shirt and do my hair a little bit.
Well, that's exactly what we're aiming for, is a good opportunity to work on these things. Before we get going, I'd just like to invite our audience to share any questions that they have for Daniel in the Q&A board as we go along, and we'll try to answer as many as possible as we get going. Okay, so Daniel, I guess I'd like to start by asking, why does being in a crowd affect how we enjoy our entertainment?
Yeah, so I think if you ask most people what are their top, 3 to 5 life experiences, most people would say getting married to their spouse or the birth of their kids, the things you sort of have to say. But after that, most people would say some sort of experience of a performance, like a concert they went to, or their favorite actor in their favorite play, or being at a cup final, being in the stands. These things are just really salient and important to us, I think. And we've known that they have this quality for a long time. 100 years ago, Durkheim talked about the collective effervescence, this sort of fizzing that we get, this emotional amplification when we're surrounded by other people. So we've known they're really central to our lives for some time. What's changed recently is the sort of tools we have to study them.
In what way?
So what we've been using is physiology. So we've been using these little things. They're a bit like sort of an Apple Watch, and they track the heart rate, your skin conductance, your body temperature, all of these things. And in the past few years, as we know, because most of us have a Fitbit or something on us, they're really portable, they're really easy to use, so you can take them out of the lab, out of a medical environment, and use that same quality of data and get it from a live audience, people watching this in a cinema, in a theater, at a football match.
Well, and in fact, I understand that you did a study with, I believe, the musical Dreamgirls. Did you use that kind of physiology for that? Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, that's right. So a theatre company came to us and they said, we want to understand our product, really, right? Why is it that people engage in live performance? Why do they pay all this money to sit in a tiny Victorian theatre where the roof falls down? They've got a 4K TV at home. Why would they do this? And we thought, well, there's a really interesting scientific question there. So we took our physiological senses to Dreamgirls, the musical that was at the Savoy. And it was very exciting to be sort of part of that. And we use these sensors because people have tried other things before, right? So you can do facial recognition. We have devices now that look at people's emotions during an experience, and we use that to see, how personal interactions work. That doesn't work in the theater. People have tried it, and the same device that will recognize if you're happy or not from your facial expressions. If you put in a theater, everyone looks bored and angry, and they're not.
But, that's counterintuitive.
Yeah,
Why?
but the algorithm is not used to that social setting. So when you're in a theatre, you don't grin your face off and have many responses because the social norm is to be as still as possible until the end when you can applaud. So people are obeying that display rule, so those sort of regular algorithms don't work. And also you go on tap on their shoulder every 5 minutes and say, you're enjoying the play, you're enjoying the play. So you have to be sneaky. You have to use these physiological sensors to get sort of under the hood. And one other, just to sort of explain what you can get from physiology. There's a slide that I sent you, Joe. Do you mind putting that up?
Sure. Let's swap to that.
So this is a study that we did just before the study in the theatre, where Audible came to us this time, and they said they want to understand what happens to the brain when you listen to audiobooks. And again, we thought, actually there's a really interesting scientific question underlying that. So what we did here is we had people, this is in the lab, right? This is not a live performance. This is one person in a tiny cubicle, and about 100 people are either listening to an audiobook, something like this section of Games of Thrones, or they're watching an equivalent bit of the story from a TV or movie adaptation. So Game of Thrones has that great HBO thing. People experience these little 3-minute segments, and then we ask them, how engaging was it? Did you feel like you're part of Westeros and so on? And what almost everyone said is that they preferred the video. They felt that was sort of a richer experience. They felt they were part of the world. But then if we look at their physiology, which you see there, that high line, that is people listening to the audiobook. So people say that they are more engaged by the video, but you look at their physiology, their heart rate is going, it's going up more, it's going down more, their skin conductance is going up, their autonomic system is generating, and even their body temperature is warmer. And that's a bit weird, right? So why would they say they're not engaged, but you look at their body and it's clocking over at a higher speed? And we think the difference is because the video you experience passively. HBO have done all the work for you. But if you're listening to the audiobook, you've got to generate that world. You've got to picture Westeros in your mind. And the crazy thing is this sounds a bit hokey, but that imaginative effort to generate that world, we can read it off at your wrist, which still surprises me that this worked at all. I didn't tell Audible that, but I was amazed we got these differences. So that showed us that you can read off this sort of thing. Do you want to go back to the...
Yeah, so is that the technology that you were using with Dreamgirls then, with people in the audience at the Savoy?
That's right. The same sensors, about a dozen people each time. We did it a couple times in a row. And we tracked their heart rate and we tracked all of their physiology. And what we found was that... we got peaks and troughs, right? So we got peaks and troughs. People's heart rate went up and it went down and so on. And if you look at how high the heart rate was going, it was about equivalent to sort of 30 minutes mild exercise, like a brisk walk. So we were elevating, right? Going to the theatre was a little bit like exercise in that way. But the really interesting thing was when we compared what happened to your heart rate at the theatre with what happened at the cinema. And the good thing about Dreamgirls is there's a movie version of it, so we can have that sort of balance. It's not exactly the same. But when we lined up the heart rate traces, we found that the peaks and the troughs lined up at the same point. So why we get a peak here in the cinema and a peak here in the theatre, well, that's because that's the moment that she left the band, or that's the moment that her husband left her. Those story arcs, those are things that are driving the physiology and synchronizing them, lining up those two experiences. So we found that the heart rate responded to this dramatic experience people were having. But the other thing we found is if you looked at the cinema and you looked at the movie, you looked at the film version, you looked at the live theatre version. The live theatre version, the heart went up and down more. There was bigger peaks and bigger troughs as well. There was more variance in it overall. And that's interesting because it's not as simple as when your heart rate goes up, you're excited, when it goes down, you're bored. Sometimes when you're really invested in something in front of you, as you are probably now, Joe, listening to me, your heart rate will drop because you're sort of engrossed in what's happening. You know, you call it a heart-stopping moment. And in the theatre, we saw those heart-stopping moments and we saw the peak of excitement. It was a much sort of bigger scope. So that's what we think is our way of quantifying that special experience that you have during live theatre.
So that's remarkable. So you're actually at some level capturing kind of the buzz of being in an audience through these kind of physiological measurements. Is that right?
Well, we think so. Something like that. Yeah. And it's weird, actually. I mean, I don't have a good scientific answer to this yet. But if you talk to performers, it's so salient. The energy from the crowd, they can exactly feel it. They come off stage and they can tell other actors what the crowd is like tonight. And they respond to it. The good ones will respond to it in real time and shape that audience. But no one really has any sense of, well, what is that signal? What are they actually sensing from the audience? Because the lights are down. You can see very little. Chances are they're sat as still as they can. But somehow they at least feel like they have an access to that energy that's happening. I mean, I'm obviously not a performer, but I lecture to 200 people, right? A lot lower level of arousal in my audience. I'm detecting if they're asleep or checking Facebook or not. But again, just a lecture, as I'm sure you have too, you can tell someone exactly the energy, moment by moment. You can say, no, they dropped off of that slide.
No, it's really remarkable when you're in front of a group like that, isn't it? Because you do feel that, and it's real. I don't know what it is, but it's certainly fascinating. And the idea that you can get some kind of index there is amazing. You mentioned that you compared the Dreamgirls, the theater experience, to Dreamgirls, the movie, which is, that star-studded cast. There was Jennifer Hudson and Beyonce and Jamie Foxx and others. Was that in a cinema? How did that work?
No, so there we were showing that to people in lab cubicles by themselves, or in a small setting with 10 other people in a room. And we got sort of, as the social context went up, as the more people were watching, you got more variance in the heart rate. But we never matched what people experienced in the theatre. We don't quite know if that's because of the live experience of theatre or because there were thousands, not 10 or 20 people. That's what we're trying to explore later. But we have done studies just in the cinema where there's a large number of people. So we worked with View Cinema.
Okay.
And there's another slide, if you don't mind sticking that up, Joe.
Sure.
So there we did the same thing, the same sensors. We tracked people's. So here you can see the heart rate in green, the body temperature in blue, and the electrodermal activity, the skin conductance. And what you find is that you've got peaks and troughs again, right? If people were responding at random, those lines would be flat. But something is happening to give them a peak, a third of the way through, 2/3 of the way through, and a big peak at the end. What is that? Well, again, we think it's the events of the story. That's what people are responding to. And there's one particular little point about 3/4 of the way through where you get a peak in heart rate followed by a peak in EDA, and that is the moment Aladdin gets his first kiss.
No, really?
Yeah. Everyone's hearts fluttered a little bit. I mean, literally, right? That's an expression, your heart's fluttered. But we could measure that physiological response. So the interesting thing is, this is, here we're averaging over everyone, and we're saying, as a big crowd, what was the average heart rate? Did it go up and down? What we've also done is looked at a much finer level. We've looked at individuals and we said, well, for every pair of people, not is their heart rate going up or down, but how synchronized is their heart rate with each other?
And why would synchrony between different people's heart rates make a difference? What's important about that?
Yeah, so we know that synchrony happens all the time, coordination, whenever people interact. Right? So when people talk to each other, they copy their gestures. You're going to be doing this a little bit more just because you're talking to me. People copy speech rates. But also under the skin, we tend to coordinate and synchronize. So if we just gaze into each other's eyes, Joe, our heart rates will synchronize a little bit. We know that if people are doing team exercises and their heart rates start to synchronize, that'll change how they work as a team. In fact, one of my favorite studies done by a friend of mine, she went to a village in Spain where they do one of these crazy rituals where they walk across the coals. Yeah. And she put these same heart rate monitors on the fire walkers and on the people who are watching. And the amazing thing is then she quantified the degree to which there was heart rate synchrony between the walker and the people watching. Sorry, I'll turn around so you can see it. There you go. And what she found is she got different levels of synchrony. So if this is your mum watching you doing the firewalker, you're absolutely synchronized in your heart rates. If this is your brother, you're still synchronized, but a little less. Cousins, less again. Second cousins, less again. So if you just track the heart rate of this whole village watching people go, you could reconstruct the entire social network of relationships just from the synchrony in their heart rate.
That's astounding. I wouldn't have guessed that, why should my heart and my mother's heart or whoever's heart be beating together? Like, how could that even happen?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question that we're just tapping into it. I mean, it's not magical, right? A lot of it is just straightforward things like respiration, right? If you might gasp when they put their foot on first, they will probably gasp too. A lot of it is just you being in the same emotional space as them, right? Just before they go on, they're going to be fearful. You're going to be fearful too. So it's probably a combination of sort of empathy and imagining the emotional state they're being in with simple sort of physiological things of gesturing the same and breathing the same way as them.
And is that what's happening with the stories when people are watching Aladdin in the cinema? Is it the case that because the story has a high point or a low point, that's causing people to sort of breathe at the same time and things like that? Is that what's generating the synchrony, the story?
Yeah, there's the same stimulus coming in that people are going to respond to physiologically, and that sort of common change that they have. If they're engrossed in the movie, they're going to have the same response. So that's why when you look at the synchrony, it's sort of a measure of how engaged people are in this stimulus or in this experience. And in fact, it's also closely connected not just with how much they're engaged with the stimulus, but how much they feel that they're connected to each other. So when we did that study in the cinema, knowing this firewalker study, we just asked people as they walked out, do you feel connected to the people around you? right? They might have known the two people they came with, but not the other people. And we found there was a correlation between how synchronized their heart rates were with each other and the degree of social connections that they found to other people. We were lucky enough to just sneak in before the lockdown to go to the E&O, the National Opera, that was playing Carmen, and found the same thing. If we quantified the degree to which the audience members' heart rates were synchronized, that correlated really strongly with how engaged they were in the performance, but also how together they felt afterwards.
I guess that makes sense at some level, because if it's the story that's driving you, if you're engaged with the story, then of course you're going to be driven the same way, right? Whereas if you're just a little bit bored as sections, or you totally wish you weren't there, then you're not having your heart rate and things driven by the environment. So I could see how that would measure engagement. I think it's absolutely remarkable that it actually makes people feel closer together afterwards, given that they come in as complete strangers.
Yeah. I mean, it does. Again, it sounds terribly hokey that a Disney movie could bring people together. But those are the numbers that we get on our surveys. Those are the numbers that come out of these heart rate measurements. And probably that's why people go to the cinema still and will in the future, even though they've got their 4K TV and sound system at home, right? It's not the perceptual experience that's better at the cinema. It's the social experience.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, because I mean, one of the things I had read in preparing for today was that this kind of concern that people have now about whether people will go back to these cinemas and theaters and whatnot is, will the desire to be in a social situation override the fear associated with the sort of obviously risks at the moment? But this is an old idea, right? I mean, people have thought that technology, Netflix and 4K TVs and surround sound and all that would mean that people wouldn't go to live experiences. And that apparently is not true. Apparently theater and cinema and things like that have all gone up over the last several years, despite some of these technological advances.
Almost every ticket sales for live performance, that's music, that's opera, that's theater, and sports as well, has gone up at the same time as you've had Spotify and streaming and 4K 3D sports filming as well. It has not knocked it at all. And again, it's not the stimulus coming in, it's that sharing it with other people that is of value to us, it seems.
So what do you think this means for the future of live performance? I mean, in the title you said, long live live theater, or long live theater. What do you have in mind there?
Yeah, so one thing that's come out in the past sort of 5 years is we don't just have sort of an anecdotal sense of the value of these things. We now have really good measurements of their mental health and physical health impacts. We got these longitudinal studies. So there was a big one amongst people. This one had to be over 50, about 4,000 people across the country, the UK Household Survey. And they track mental health, they track physical health, they track frailty as you get older, your ability to look after yourself. And you can see in these big surveys, there's an effect of how much exercise you do. There's an effect of if you go to the gym, if you smoke. There's an effect of how much money you have, all of these things. But you can factor all of that stuff out, and you can just ask questions about how engaged are they in culture, in these collective cultural experiences, like going to the theater or a sports thing or going to a museum. And what you find is a remarkable effect of the degree to which you do that, directly measurable effects on your mental and physical health. So 50 to 80, your chance of being depressed goes down by a third if you go to the theater once or twice in 3 months. Your frailty, your ability to look after yourself sort of physically, that improves by about a third if you just have a couple of these cultural experiences. I mean, if this was a pill, you would buy this pill. We would prescribe it on the NHS because of its measurable effects. And in fact, a couple of years ago, they were even discussing, should your GP be able to prescribe choral singing for you? Because the effects on your mood there is comparable to SSRIs, right? So why not? Why can't we directly prescribe the arts? Because the effects are there, right? They're uncontroversial. This is work done by Daisy Fancourt at UCL too, from sort of a purely epidemiological angle, not trying to support the arts, just looking at its effect. And I think, so what's changed recently is we've got all these numbers because of work like Daisy Fancourt's. We know it's got a measurable effect. And in the past 3 months, we've had this direct, shocking experience of what it's like not to have that, right? And that's really brought it home. In fact, my wife, who you saw peeking through earlier, she was flicking through Facebook last night, and someone had made a post there that was saying, there's a lot of these going around, and it was saying, isn't it interesting, a time of crisis, we find out who we really value in society. And it's the NHS frontline workers who we pay almost nothing to, not the bankers, the lawyers, the actors who we pay all this money to, right? That's who we really value. And she's thinking, yeah, absolutely, the NHS frontline workers, and yeah, the bankers, they don't deserve that much money. But the actors, we're watching a lot of telly right now, a lot of telly, because we need to feel connected. We need the escapism. We need to feel social connection to people outside our lockdown worlds. And all of that stuff takes actors, directors, writers, right? We need all of this stuff. I mean, in our household, Netflix is a frontline worker, right? It's really bringing enormous value to us. So I feel because now the science has come in and because we've all had this sort of shock immersion and what it's like to have that in a reduced way, just to watch streams of the National Theatre. My hope is the positive idea of the theatre living longer is that the value is now there, right? The art is often seen as, and it can be, abstract and elitist and difficult. It's hard to measure, hard to quantify, but its effects are not, right? We can measure them in the mental health outcomes and the physical health outcomes, and that ephemeral experience that you can have, we can now measure it at your wrist too. So that's why we said, long live the theatre.
That's incredibly encouraging, right? I mean, I do feel like that's a definitive answer to the question that we posed at the beginning. Do we expect the audiences to be there? And it's also a really good point to maybe stop and take some audience questions. Is that okay?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. So let me just turn to a question here. What do you think will be most helpful in encouraging people back into live venues?
Lower ticket prices.
So an economic solution. How about psychologically?
Well, I think there is an element of that, right? Things like the opera and football as well, right? Those are, to see Arsenal or to see the E&O is incredibly expensive. And I think when I say cheaper ticket prices, what I mean is government, societal, tax support to lower the barrier to entry to these things.
Right.
And I think hopefully that people will recognize the value in doing that now.
And do you think people need to be reminded of the fact that, going to the cinema isn't just about seeing the very cool new Tenet movie? It's also about the social experience that comes with being in an audience. Do you think that'll help?
Yeah, and I do think that I think we were spoiled, right, up until that point, right? So the same way you go to a restaurant 3 times a week and not really notice it. I think we were really spoiled by these things. And I think when we return, the value is going to be so apparent. In fact, I went to see Avengers Endgame. This is before the lockdown, but I saw Avengers Endgame with my kids. They dragged me out to it. And the theater was absolutely packed with families and so on. And people were cheering spontaneously when certain things happened. And I thought, that's what I remember from my youth, right? Going to the cinema and everyone cheering at the end of Star Wars and things like this. But I think we've lost that because we got so spoiled by these massive cinemas with huge seats, and typically you only go, there's only 4 people. And I think when we do start going back and we start to experience these packed cinemas again, then you'll really feel the value of that social context. It's not going to feel like being on your couch. And that's going to be more obvious, I think.
I read that because in Norway, they reopened the cinemas as we're going to a few weeks ago. And although it's, there's less seats that are available and all the rest of it, they had something like 96% tickets sold, which is incredibly high. And I do think that's very encouraging for the idea that people, they miss this, they want this, and they will take advantage of it. So it's really good. Tell you what, let me turn to another question, which is really good from Rebecca here. How might you stimulate these feelings of synchrony and connectedness in an online setting?
Yes, so that is the challenge. Because there you don't have, the feeling of other people. You don't have the sight of them out the corner of your eye. You can't hear the audience gasp. We are trying. So I'm working with a guy, very talented computer scientist at Yonghyun Cho rather, who's at UCL too. We're working on a system where, can't say too much about this because there's work ongoing, but what we're trying to do is use ways to track your heart rate at home. Because it turns out that now everyone has something like a supercomputer in their pocket, right? And that has sensing devices that we can exploit. So possibly we could track people's heart rate while they're watching some live performance. That information, your heart rate, got sent to a server that then depicts the synchrony in the heart rate of everyone. So you get sort of a picture of the heart rate synchrony next to the performer right here. This is something we're working on. We were working on for the Moon Festival, this wonderful festival that's going to be at Alexandra Palace. And we're going to have the audience's heart rate be tracked, and as their heart rate synchronized, it was going to make the moon rise on stage, which we can't do. It's all been canceled now. But we're hoping to come back next year. But the same technology, we think, well, yeah, we could maybe use that a little bit to create essentially what's a mass biofeedback. That's what we're doing. We're telling the audience, this is how you're responding right now. So you don't feel like you're watching this in a void. And obviously, you have to do the science to prove that that works, but that's the sort of direction we're going to try and leverage these sorts of effects and bring them into a virtual world too.
Sure. And do you think even without that kind of feedback, people look for this? Like, I'm thinking about, what's the guy named Joe Wick or something like that who does those like exercise routines where people seem to sign on live. There's no advantage theoretically to doing it at the same time as a billion people. But
that was a really crazy phenomenon. Like overnight, you got like 1 million people doing it. And again, it was all about the timing, right? You could have watched that at any time of day, who were turning up at that moment, doing their exercises together. And, you know, we know from but they only believe other people are doing it because they can't actually see them.
Exactly.
But we know from lots of studies that these sort of things have a direct effect on the body. So if you exercise and do press-ups with someone looking at them like this is done with Oxford rowers, and you do it like this so you can synchronize, or you do it looking this way so you're out of time with each other. You then row faster and push yourself through the pain barrier more. It shifts your pain threshold if you just synchronize with someone. You're more likely to change this. It changes your endorphin levels if you laugh with other people at live stand-up shows. All of this stuff has direct measurable effects on your glands pumping out all these different hormones.
Remarkable. There are a lot of good questions. Let me just get to a few more here while we can. Taubi has asked, can you please talk about why people would like to spectate at a marathon? What aspect enhances their spectator experience?
Wow, I have no idea. These are really interesting questions. So actually one thing that's going to be happening is I have a colleague, Guido Orgs, and he has something called the NeuroLive project that's going to start next year. It's a massive project that he's headed that I'm part of too. And we're going to try and figure out with all of these neuroscientific tools exactly how do you understand these different types of spectating. What is it like to watch something physically in the room with someone as opposed to out of time with other people? What is it like to be there, right? And there's even now, I mean, marathon might sound strange, but even people gather together in massive stadiums to watch people play esports, to sit at a computer.
Yeah.
Stuff. Right, with me, because I'm old, I guess seems mental. But again, they're getting some psychological value from that. That is a live experience that's giving something to them. So I don't have a very good answer to that yet, but hopefully Guido and I will soon when we've gone through this project and try to contrast all these really interesting cases against each other.
And there's another question here from Susie saying, have measurements been made about visiting static art, like museums and things like that? Do you get these same kind of benefits?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. And again, we were just in the stages of planning this research when the lockdown gates came down. But there is some really nice work, yes, actually showing that just believing that you're basically, whenever we think that we're sharing a stimulus, sharing something, that increases our enjoyment of it and it bonds us to the person next to us. So there's a really clever study done by people in Harvard, I'm blanking on the name, but what they did is they did it in a museum and people were having those, those audio guides where you punch in number 23. And basically they tricked the subjects. So everyone's wandering around listening to their audio guide, looking at stuff, but they had a choice of what to do. So basically we're stood there and you're stood there looking at the same painting. And I either think you're listening to the same audio guide as me or not.
Okay.
And if you believe that the other people are having that shared experience with you, then that increases your appreciation of the art. So it's a really nice contrast because I was looking at the same stuff, having the same experience, but all we switched was that a shared experience or not?
Right. No, that's amazing.
And in fact, this works with chimps too, not in art galleries, but just if this is Tomasello's work, if you just look at chimps and you give them little movies and they sit and watch movies like us, they will then, their social behavior, their grooming will all change if they believe that everyone has watched the same movie. Right? You can't give them surveys, but they're more likely to pick the nits off each other and to groom. All of that social behavior changes with this belief that they've shared this experience.
Well, this all feeds beautifully into Fiona's question, which is to say, how do you use this kind of research to enhance the experience of the arts in some way?
Yes, so we're thinking about these different ways to bring this information into the experience, right? So what if, it is hard for a performer to know how the audience are responding. Well, what if we can make that part of the performance? What if while you're on stage, you can see this visualization of the audience's heart rate? Could you incorporate that? Could you use it? And that's sort of where the science and the art are blending, right? Of the representation, what's going on scientifically feeds into what's happening on stage. So we're trying to think about, and we would love to talk to anyone who is interested in sort of exploring that intersection. But there you're sort of changing the performance and bringing stuff in. So the more mundane way I think some of this research can change it is just telling people about this work Daisy Fancourt and other people are doing about the measurable benefits right there. And it's not an abstract thing. You can measure this directly. And I think if we can encourage that and we can motivate for supporting the artistic community and the work that they do.
Fantastic. I realize that I've gotten a little overexcited with questions and we're running a little bit late at this point. So I should just apologize to everyone if I haven't gotten to your question. We had a load of other really good ones. Daniel?
Can I say one thing? So just to tell people at home, it's a bit weird because all of this research I've talked about as mine, actually I did it with Joe. He collaborated with me. But through the magic of acting and theater, he has led you to believe that he has no idea about this. So just credit where credit due. Lots of this is all Joe's work too.
Well, thank you for that. My secret has been exposed. Now I'm all...
Yes. Yeah.
And just in general, thank you, Daniel, for talking to us and providing the kind of hope and enthusiasm that's clearly there. And I think that the fact that it's empirically based, there's scientific evidence behind this enthusiasm is a really encouraging thing at the moment. So I'm hopefully we'll stop hearing as many terrible stories about how audiences won't come back. Financially, if the theaters and the cinemas can make it possible, I think we're going to be there.
I hope so too.
Next week, we're going to discuss how your brain navigates the world around you and what this means for architecture, dementia, and getting lost in IKEA. Please join us on Monday for the next episode. Thank you very much, everyone, and goodbye.